Ethan Crumbley is convicted of savagely murdering 4 fellow students, plus shooting another 7 children in his school. Now, Crumbley wants a Michigan judge to grant him parole, and his lawyers say he'd return to society a healed and better person. And I want to know what you think. Welcome to Profiling Evil, folks. I'm Mike King, and I joined Kelly Craft on Court TV this morning to chat about the sentencing testimony that's ongoing in the Ethan Crumbley murder case. Crumbley is hoping that the court will give him life with the possibility of parole, and a whole bunch of folks are hoping that they throw away the key and hold Crumbley responsible for the murders that he committed. Well, please, folks, hit that like and subscribe button and ring the bell so that you get all of our videos here at Profiling Evil. Make sure you're getting those notifications. You know, the human tragedy in the true crime community doesn't seem to be slowing down, does it? I mean, yesterday we were watching Lori Vallow Daybell in her attempt to get the court to give her life with the possibility of parole. You know, hold her less responsible for the murders of her children and Chad Daybell's wife, Tammy. Today, the same story is unfolding, just a different venue. And I'm wondering how you feel about people who are convicted for murder, given life sentences, but offered the chance to one day get out of jail, get out of prison, so they can enjoy their final years of existence. Something, by the way, kind of bothers me that their victims are never going to realize they'll never have the chance to do. Well, Crumbley is now 16 years old, and he's participating in a legally required hearing called a Myre hearing. Now, Myre hearings are a pre-sentence hearing that's mandatory under U.S. law, and it's mandatory in all life sentences where the defendant is under the age of 18 years old. It came about as part of a Supreme Court ruling in 2012 that was titled Myre versus Alabama. And that ruling, coupled with a Michigan Supreme Court rule that says life sentences for people under the age of 18 could be considered cruel and unusual punishment, are bringing us where we are today. And I want to remind you folks, they're saying this might be cruel and unusual punishment to put Ethan Crumbley away for the rest of his life, which he was convicted of. Yeah, I want to remind you that 4 people were murdered by Crumbley and another 7 were shot. I mean, that seems pretty dang cruel. Well, regardless, a Myre hearing is underway for Crumbley as we speak, and prosecutors can still pursue a life without parole sentence, but the hearing must ensure that Crumbley's rights are protected. So let me take you back to the opening statements by the prosecution in this hearing, which I thought were intriguing and frankly pretty dang direct. Oakland County Prosecutor Karen McDonald agreed that in most cases, minors shouldn't be sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, but continued by stating in the state's opinion, Crumbley is an exception to the possible rule. She said the hearing was the most important legal proceeding that every person in the courtroom was there to take in because Ethan decided to kill 4 people and take their lives instead of his own. If you remember, he is an anomaly because most mass murderers will shoot themselves after committing these crimes. Now, the prosecutor went on to remind the court that Crumbley took joy in executing the students, plus shooting another 7 who survived. She reminded the court that Crumbley walked up to each victim and calmly shot them at point-blank range. She reminded the court that Crumbley planned these murders in advance, writing about it, speaking about it, and frankly fantasizing about it. She reminded the court that Crumbley didn't kill himself, like I mentioned, like most mass murderers do. Instead, he made sure he was around so that he could witness the carnage and the suffering that he created. Now, Crumbley's defense team argues that the Myre ruling requires the court to consider circumstances like Crumbley's age his financial and home environment. And there's no question, it appears, number one, he was young. Appears that his family life was kind of crummy. And they want the court to consider the circumstances, not the facts of the case, the fact that he killed 4 people. And they want the court to also consider the possibility of rehabilitation. The defense even suggested that the prosecution only filed life without parole after they knew that he was going to plead guilty, something that apparently Crumbley wasn't expecting. I still wonder if he wouldn't have pled guilty anyway. In fact, if you remember his comments, I'm going to die in prison. I'm going to serve life in prison. Well, as the witnesses started taking the stand, Crumbley's journal and his social media posts became a topic of discussion, wherein Crumbley clearly fantasized about what he would do with that semi-automatic 9mm pistol that his parents purchased him. One quote that I remember quite vividly that Crumbley penned in his notebook on the day of the shootings was, quote, "I will continue to shoot people until the police breach the building. Then I'll surrender to them and plead guilty to life in prison," close quote. Well, his fantasies included wanting to shoot a pretty girl in the back of the head, and his journal included a drawing of a girl with a gun pointed at her head, firing. He said, quote, "The first victim was going to be a pretty girl with a future so that she can suffer just like me," close quote. Well, today on Court TV, they showed a video of Crumbley after the shooting and while he was in police custody. Now, the images and the audio resembled what I envisioned the moans and groans of purgatory would be like. It gives us a glimpse into that moment when Crumbley's fantasy was destroyed by the reality of what he'd done. Let's watch this.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, God.
Well, I was asked by Kelly Crapp on Court TV what my thoughts were on that particular video from a police perspective. Now, I suspect that the video created a lot of emotion in all of you. It certainly does in me, but it doesn't change the fact that, in my opinion, there needs to be justice. So let's just catch up on what my response to Kelly was.
Here to discuss this case, retired police commander and host of the Profiling Evil podcast, Mike King in Dallas, Texas, and in Denver, Colorado, criminal defense attorney Jeffrey Wolf. Thank you for joining us, gentlemen. Mike, I want to start with you this morning. We were watching that footage of Ethan Crumbley in jail, and he's saying, "Why didn't you stop it, God? Why didn't you stop it when it happened?" What are your thoughts when taking a look at that from a police perspective? Obviously, over the years, there has been much more mental health training for police officers. Some would argue there needs to be more. What's your take?
Well, number one, I think there were attempts from the school and others to try to stop what they deemed was some really frightening behavior that was starting to be exhibited. But I guess the place that I go on this thing is that I certainly am not a psychologist on the stand, but here's the thing that bothers me from a criminologist standpoint. And that is, while I understand that this kid now is facing the remorse of what happened, he still chose to do the things that led to the deaths of so many children. And that I have to keep in the forefront. And I think this brings a really important thing out about this change that occurs between fantasy and reality. And we see through his documentation, through the notes he was keeping, through his notebook and other kinds of things, this fantasy that was going on. And he finally acts it out. But in reality, The sad part is reality is never as cool as fantasy, and all of a sudden he's feeling this remorse. But bottom line to me is, regardless of whether there's mental illness involved, what I think has been clearly exhibited is that this child, this kid, this predator understood what society standards were, and he chose to violate them anyway.
Well, hey, folks, it's Mike from Profiling Evil, and I want to share my thoughts about our affiliate, Truthfinder. I use Truthfinder every single day to research the people and the cases that we're talking about here. But you can use it to reconnect with a loved one, find an old friend, or look up your former schoolmates. Now, they make searching really easy, and all you got to do is enter a name, an address, a phone number, or an email. Then you're provided with this really cool list that you can start to explore. Use Truthfinder to figure out who that new neighbor really is, or keep your family safe by checking out the parents in your kids' carpool. Now, many of you use the internet to search out new friends, but you can use Truthfinder to sniff out scammers and online predators, especially before you meet them in person. And folks, we get a small commission when you sign up. It's about enough to buy a small soda, but you gain the ability to satisfy your curiosity, protect your family, and find the truth out about people in your life. Please take advantage of the special Profiling Evil discount code. It's on the screen, and it's also in the description down below. And remember, you can cancel this thing at any time. Now, let's get back to today's crime case. Well, this video is about Ethan Crumbley and whether he should get life with the possibility of parole, or if he should die in prison. Now, I don't think any of us would like to be judged today on the kinds of things we did 20, 30, or even 40 years ago. I'd like to think that I'm a better person today than I was when I was a teenager, and I certainly wouldn't want to be judged today on the things that I was doing in my youth. And so I've got to take that into consideration, but frankly, is that enough? Justice requires penalties. In religious terms, justice can be mitigated by mercy. In the case of this convicted murderer, Ethan Crumbley, justice requires life. Now, the question is there room for mercy in cases like this one? I mean, could it be that mercy could step in after 40 years? And could Ethan Crumbley spend 40 years in prison and come out and be whole and healed and productive? Or will 40 years in prison just make this kid even more broken? I don't know. What are your thoughts on this one,
Okay, well,
folks?
thank you. And Mike, I want to get you in here quickly. So we were talking about, this is the U.S. Supreme Court case, Miller versus Alabama. I know when I was doing appellate work a lot, these cases would come up all the time about juveniles, and should we look at resentencing all of these juveniles? Mike, when we talk about these video games, he was talking about, this content that children can ingest, and if they don't have supervision, it can lead to really bad thoughts in their head. Do you have any take on that?
I look at this pretty simplistically, I think. I kind of look at this as a big old bucket, and if we continue to pour ugly things into it, violence, demeaning behaviors, poor supervision, that bucket just fills with ugliness, and we need to have balance in the lives of these young people. And I'm certainly not going to attack the game systems, but holy cow, this kid had a lot going against him.
He sure did, Mike.
Well, here's where I want you all to weigh in about your answer, but I want you to do it from two different perspectives. First, think about how you'd respond if you were the parent of one of those children who were gunned down and murdered in that school. To put this in perspective, think down the road 40 years and how you'd feel if Crumbley was given parole. To maybe make this a little easier to understand, think about what's happened in the last couple of months with the release of Leslie Van Houten from prison. Now, she was found guilty of murdering 2 people, not 4, and not shooting an additional 7. She was guilty of murdering 2 people. She spent 53 years in prison and was just paroled. And if you don't remember the name, she was one of Charles Manson's followers who did his bidding. Well, today, she walks free. So what do you think about 40 years down the road, Ethan Crumbley walking free? And would you feel differently because he's a 15-year-old, 16-year-old today versus a 22-ish-year-old girl in Van Houten's case? I'm going to be looking for your answers down below, and I hope you'll take this opportunity to watch some of this trial as it unfolds on Court TV. I'm going to be on again tomorrow to offer a little more commentary, and maybe we'll chat again after that. And I hope you'll consider liking and subscribing this video, and also subscribe to Profiling Evil across the board. You know, we love to grow, and we appreciate all of your support. So please share us with all your friends and watch for us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and of course here on YouTube. And folks, if you like podcasts, make sure you're checking us out on Profiling Evil Podcasts. You can find it on your favorite podcast platform. And you can get more information about Profiling Evil at profilingevil.com, where you can order merchandise and books. And you can dig into our story maps. And I hope while you're there, you'll sign up for our free digital newsletter, the B.O.L.O. It's a place where you can get a little more information, and it only goes out once or twice a year. So thanks again for your support, and we'll see you soon at the next crime scene.